All of this sort of breaks the expectation of the bond market, because here's how bond investors see this situation. They're like, so you're spending way more money than you're making. You are invading a country that might affect global supply chains, which affects food and energy for the entire world and has a cascade effect on everything. And you want me to lend you my money. Well, okay, if I'm going to lend you money and buy your bonds while the world's on fire, I'm going to need you to pay me more money. In fact, because of what's happening in Iran, I might need to sell some of my bond holdings to pay for my food and gas. So if you want my money, you're going to have to pay me more. That's what's happening right now in the bond market, which is also why 10-year term premiums, which measure how much extra compensation investors want for the risk of holding long-term bonds, are also going way, way up. This is not just in the US. In the UK, the 2-year yield just made the biggest move since October 2022. You might remember it was called the Liz Truss moment. That's when the UK Prime Minister announced a budget that scared bond markets so bad that the Bank of England had to get involved to prevent a complete collapse of the UK pension system, right? So UK yields are now up a lot in just a couple weeks. Now, why this matters to the US, though, is because European and UK investors own about 40% of all US treasuries held outside the United States. And Europe and the UK are hurting for energy, which means when their bond markets crack under the potential pressure of an oil shock and rising inflation and their need for food and energy, those investors have to sell something to pay for it, their US treasuries, so they can get the cash to pay for all those necessities, right? And that does what? It pushes US yields higher. The UK's bond problem then becomes a US bond problem. We saw this happen in 2022, and it's kind of happening again right now. That is just the bond market. Well, then there's the stock market side of it. And here's how bonds sort of play into the stock market. When long-term bond rates go up, maybe because nations are selling their treasuries, stock valuations tend to compress. The overly simplified logic for this is, if you can get a guaranteed 4 or 5% return from a government bond, completely risk-free, right? Then why would you take the risk of owning stocks unless you were offered something better? Right? Most people probably wouldn't, especially in a time when AI and robots are expected to take people's jobs, in a time when private credit companies are under stress. So if you have money, then why risk it in the market? That's the overly simplified logic.